Hola a todos, hola a todas. Estamos hoy día con Rick Ridgeway, destacado montañista internacional, defensor del medio ambiente, líder de sostenibilidad en el marco del primer Summit de Sustentabilidad de Walmart, Chile. Hi Rick, nice to
Hello.
meet you.
Nice to
It's
meet
an
you
honor
guys.
to be speaking with you.
Yes,
Thank you very much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
So your professional mountain career began at early 70s. Tell me, which were the main challenges to this back then?
For becoming a montañista, an andenista, como dice acá en Chile. So yeah, I started climbing when I was a teenager. So I began in the 1960s. And I always dreamed of getting to the high mountains in the world. When I was 14 years old, I saw an article in the National Geographic magazine about the first American ascent of Mount Everest in 1963. And I saw the photographs of the climbers reaching the top of the highest mountain in the world. And I just told myself, that's who I want to be. That's what I want to do. So I did everything I could to find other people who were climbers, but in the 1960s, there weren't that many, and there were no schools to learn how to become a climber. But eventually I met a few climbers. I learned how to rock climb. And then in the 1970s, in the early 1970s, I went on several expeditions to South America, to Peru,
Wow.
to climb in the Andes. And then that led to an invitation in 1976 to join what then was only the second American expedition ever to go to Mount Everest. And so my first trip to the Himalayas was to the highest mountain in the world. And that led to an invitation to go on another expedition 2 years later, in the late 1970s, to climb K2.
Yes.
And that mountain is much more difficult than Mount Everest. And now it's considered the most difficult high-altitude mountain in the world to climb. But back then, it was a very good thing we didn't know that.
Yes, especially in winter, right?
No, we didn't climb it in winter, but we made what was only the third ascent of K2. So only the third time anybody had ever climbed the mountain. And we were the first to climb it without using oxygen. And we also climbed it by a new route that nobody had ever ascended before. And even now, 50 years later, no one has climbed that route ever again.
Wow.
So, yeah.
It was unique.
It was unique, yeah.
So how do you think the preparation and the approach to high altitude expedition have changed since then?
The equipment is much, much better, as it probably is in any sport. But climbing is different than most sports. You know, it may be different than even any other sport in that the progress of the sport over the decades since I started has been a simplification. And in most sports, things get more complicated. The equipment gets more complicated. The way the sport is conducted gets more complex. As our lives get more complex, it seems like that is in parallel to the way all of our lives as human beings evolves. We just seem to get more and more complex. But in climbing, it's been the opposite of that. And it has gotten simpler and simpler until finally one climber named Alex Honnold simplified the sport to the maximum amount possible when he climbed one of the hardest cliffs in the world, El Capitan in Yosemite in California, without a rope, with nothing but the shoes on his feet and his fingers. And that was the highest achievement in climbing ever. Maybe the highest achievement that will ever be done by anybody. and it was the the absolute simplification of the sport. It was the sport at its most pure essence. I think that ascent of El Capitan in Yosemite without a rope was the single highest achievement of a human being in a sports endeavor in the history of human beings.
And it was not so long ago.
No, only a few years ago. And we got to witness it. It's very special.
You were there?
No, but a lot of my friends were.
Oh,
including my friend Jimmy Chen. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he recorded it, right?
He did. He made the movie.
That was you're right.
And he's a good friend of mine. I've climbed with Jimmy here in Chile before.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Jimmy and I and Yvon Chouinard and Doug Tompkins, we made the first ascent of a mountain in Patagonia National Park called, well, back when we climbed it, it didn't even have a name. And then after we climbed the mountain, Doug Tompkins had your government in Chile name it Cerro Cristina after his wife, Chris Tompkins.
Great.
So Jimmy Chen and I and Yvonne and Doug made the first ascent of Cerro Cristina.
So you have spoken about that, about the importance of the human relationships in this sport. So tell me, how did these bonds with Yvonne, with Doug, with Jimmy influence the approach that you have to the expeditions and the explore?
Yeah. Well, I've been climbing with Yvon Chouinard for over 50 years now. And I had a long career in climbing partnership with Doug Tompkins. And Yvonne and Doug and I went on many expeditions and climbs together. And we also did many of those climbs with other friends like Jimmy Chen. We called our little group the Do Boys, and that was a name that Doug Tompkins found when he ran Esprit, the clothing company, and he was in Japan one time. And he found this comic book in Japan about this little group of friends who went around accomplishing things and having adventures, and they called themselves the Do Boys. You know, in English, do is to para hacer, hacer algo. And so that was our nickname.
I love it.
And we were all business people too, and successful business people. I asked Yvon recently what he learned from all that time in nature that he took from the mountains and applied to the way he ran his business. And he went like this. He said, I didn't learn anything. And I said, of course you learned a lot of things, you know. And he said, well, I actually learned one thing about how to run a business. And he said, it's that any business has a responsibility to protect the planet. And that was because he recognized, just like Doug did, like I did, like all our friends did, that all businesses depend on a healthy planet to have a healthy business. And we realized that without a healthy planet, there can't even be business. There can't be any sustainable, healthy human society. So that connection was so foundational that both Doug and Yvonne ran their businesses as agents of environmental protection. And that's been a big influence on how many business people think about their businesses, their companies, and their own personal responsibility as well as executives. That's one of the reasons I came to Chile to talk to the people at Walmart Chile and to all their vendors to talk about this very, very topic, about the responsibility that I believe all businesses have to do what they can to keep our one and only planet healthy.
Do you think that you have like a moment that make you a click in your life to realize that?
People are always, wanting to identify that one moment in their lives where things are going like this, and then you have this epiphany, this single realization that is so profound that you turn your life in a different direction. We all are attracted to that idea, but the reality of our lives is usually that things evolve and change more slowly. And that was certainly true with my own path from initially being a climber, where the obsession with mountaineering and alpinismo was, the thrill of the climb and the expedition, the adventure of it, the satisfactions of learning how to not take risks, but manage risk, the pleasures of achieving things with a small team of friends, the companionships that come out of that, the opportunity to spend time in the most wildest places on the planet. All those things are what got me started as a mountaineer. But then slowly over the decades, my focus changed from doing the sports of outdoor adventure in these places that we went to, these wild places, to doing whatever I could to save the wild places. And that was because over the years, again, with Yvon Chouinard and Doug Tompkins and my close friends, we all began to witness the degradation of the places where we were doing our sports. We, with our own eyes, saw the human footprint and its development expanding. Especially here in South America, we saw the pastures being overgrazed and turned into deserts. We saw the glaciers beginning to melt and retreat. With our own eyes, we bore witness to that. And so over time, we all became committed to doing whatever we could to do something about it. And those guys were my mentors. Yvon, of course, decided to manage his business to use it as a tool for environmental protection. And he's done that arguably more than any business person in the world with what Patagonia has achieved. And of course, Doug did the same thing. And ultimately, when he sold his share in his last business, Esprit, he used that money to come here to your country in Chile and start, buying lands to eventually convert into national parks. So that's what he chose to do. And one of the messages for all of us from the example of Doug Tompkins is to do the same thing, to learn what assets we own. And they don't have to just be money. They can be whatever skills we have to do what we can. And as Yvon has said, if you know how to write, you should write about the injustices in the world and to the planet. And if you know how to speak, speak out against what's happening to our one and only home planet. If you have spare time, you should donate some of that time to the groups that are working on the ground to try and protect the planet. If you have extra money, you should become a philanthropist and donate it to the NGOs, the ANEHAs that are working on the ground. But you have to do something. You have to act. And that in English is the core of the word activist.
So Yvon founded Patagonia. You worked in Patagonia, and that is the fashion industry that it's difficult because it's one of the most that we cuestionamos internationally. So what challenges do you think still exist in this fashion industry, and how can we overcome this resistance to change? Patagonia
is, in the business of making clothes. And it's also in the business of producing food. It has a much smaller company called Patagonia Provisions, which makes food. And it's interesting that Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, has chosen very carefully and intentionally to have a company in those two areas because we all wear clothes and we all eat food. And those things are essential unless we're going to be naked living in a cave. So the question then becomes, well, since we're all going to wear clothes and we're all going to eat food, how do you make those clothes and produce that food with the smallest impact on the environment? And then how do you use your learnings from that goal to influence other companies? That's the reason Patagonia exists. So we have to recognize that since we're all going to wear clothes, we need to think about how to make those clothes with the smallest impact. And we need to think about how to run the companies making clothes to be like Patagonia, agents for environmental protection. That's sort of the North Star. And then when you look at companies making clothes that are in fast fashion, compared to that, they're on the other end of the spectrum of how to do it. But the solutions on how to do it are there, So then you need to look at that. And I think realize that ultimately the responsibility is not just with the companies. And in fact, maybe ultimately it's with us.
Yes.
So if we are buying clothes from fast fashion companies and we're wearing them for a few weeks and then throwing them away, or leaving them in our closet and not using them, and acquiring and accumulating more clothes until our closet just fills up, it's not the company's responsibility as much as it is ours to do something about that. So I think all of us as consumers have this responsibility to think about the impacts of our actions and to support the companies that are committing to doing something about it.
How can development and conservation be in the same level? How is that dialogue?
I said a minute ago that there are some things in our lives that are essential. We're all going to wear clothes and we're all going to eat food. And the idea is how to align our lives with companies that are making and distributing consumer goods and offering services with a commitment to reduce their impact on society and on the planet. Like my host here, Walmart Chile, is trying to do. Like, I'm going to go visit their distribution facility here that is powering their trucks with hydrogen. How fascinating is that? I love those kinds of solutions to these problems. But I'm bringing that up because we're all going to, as human beings, continue to consume these goods and use these services. And we have to learn how to do that in a way that is in harmony with the natural part of the earth. And I'm convinced there's ways forward to do that. And I think that we need to learn how to contain our human footprint to the cities and the rural areas where we live in a way that also allows nature and the natural parts of the system to go about how nature runs its life without our control. So ultimately, we need to learn how to zone the planet better. So we human beings go about our activities here. That we go about those activities with the lowest possible footprint that we can come up with. And we allow nature to go about its life in these areas. We define that more clearly than it is now. And part of that solution depends on having natural protected areas like you do in Chile. Again, one of the biggest contributions I think that maybe Doug had in his life here in Chile was getting people to think about how important protected areas are in any country. Because that's the solution. We live here, we let nature live here. We do those things. If we go about our business here and we go about it completing the conversion from using fossil fuels to using renewable energy, we go about our lives here producing our food with regenerative farming protocols, again, like Walmart is exploring in partnership with farmers around the world. And we let nature go about its life over here so that nature continues to pull carbon out of the air and put it back into the soil and into the plants that cover those natural areas like the earth does, like the earth knows how to do. We do all those things. We can regain a balance.
Mm-hmm.
We can solve climate change.
Mm.
We can prevent ocean acidification. We can stop the extinction of species. But again, we don't have a lot of time left to figure that out, but it's doable. And it's doable with resources that we already have. We know how to do it.
We just have to do it.
Yes.
So you have been in Chile several times with Doug. So how was it for you to explore this country?
Well, Doug Tompkins came to Chile in the early 60s. When he was only in his early 20s, he and his first wife, Susie, flew down here in a very small airplane from the United States. And Doug had a terrific adventure here. And more than any place in the world, he loved the natural beauty of Chile. It just stood out for him. And also Yvon. It's not just by coincidence that Yvon Chouinard called his company Patagonia. It's because for both Yvon and Doug, Patagonia represented the wildness of nature, and it represented the unmatched beauty of the natural wild parts of the planet. That's why Doug came to Chile for the last part of his life to do what he could to protect the wild places in your country. And it's why Yvon named his company after your lands here in southern Chile. It's because the nature in Chile is just unmatched in the world. And I think that with a company like Patagonia becoming so globally recognized, and with Doug Tompkins becoming a worldwide celebrity, and with Chris Tompkins becoming the next Jane Goodall, that the awareness of the beauty of Chile is spreading around the world. And I know I see there's so many people coming now to Chile to visit the parks that Doug and Chris created. It's just fabulous to see that happening.
And what do you love the most about, like with your experience, about these mountains?
Oh, there's the mountains are unmatched. The mountains in Chile are unmatched in the world. I mean, when you go to places like the Torres de Paine and the Fitzroy and the mountains outside of Chaltén, the mountains on the southern ice cap, it's unique in the world. That they're just among the most stunning landscapes on planet Earth. So you guys have a pretty special place here. It's unique, and you need to guard and save it.
And you get to know these places with Doug as well, right?
Yeah, I did. I've been so privileged in my life to have had Doug Tompkins as one of the most important mentors for me. Not only showing me about the beauty of the natural world, but really inspiring me to do what I can to help protect it, just like he did. So that's pretty special.
Do you have a place or an expedition that is the most significant to you?
Oh, people sometimes ask me if, I have a favorite climb or a favorite place in the world, and that's really hard to answer. And the truth is that no, there's no single place that stands out above all the others, but there's certainly a few. And the wildlands that you have in southern Chile are among my favorite on planet Earth.
Wow. And a specific place, like you can remember?
Oh, I've, just had the privilege of going into really wild places in Patagonia with Doug and Yvon, and certainly there are specific memories that that stand out. I once did the first ascent of a volcano down outside of Puerto Montt in Chile with Doug Tompkins, and it was right on the edge of Pumalín Park. And I remember we reached the summit, and we were sitting up there just looking out over this giant landscape. And he had managed to purchase over time nearly all the lands that we were looking across, and they would become the future Pumalín Douglas Tompkins National Park. But back then it wasn't a park yet. And I said, how does it feel to have bought all this land because a bunch of women bought a bunch of dresses? And he looked out and laughed, and he said, yeah, the most ironical part is it was a bunch of dresses they didn't even need. So I've had wonderful memories like that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So after over 50 years dedicated to exploration, mountaineering, and conservation, you have decided to focus more in writing and as a speaker. So how has your new adventure has developed?
Oh, well, I retired from Patagonia 5 years ago, but I haven't retired. I tell people now that I think I'm working more than when I worked. And I wake up every day and write for 2 or 3 or 4 hours. And I've always loved writing. I've written 7 books, and I'm working on an 8th one now.
Wow.
And since I was in my 20s, I've always been writing. I've always kept journals all the time. I have my journal with me here on this trip to Chile. I'll probably put an entry in there tonight about all the wonderful people that I've met here on this visit. And then I do spend time working with other companies, like I am now with Walmart Chile. And then I do volunteer work with conservation groups. I still am on the board of directors of Tompkins Conservation. Mm-hmm. I work on saving specific species. I work with turtles and tortoises around the world to save them. I'm working with a group trying to bring grizzly bears back to California, where they've been extinct for 100 years, even though the bear is on the flag of California. There are no grizzly bears left in California. How wonderful would it be if before I die, I could see grizzly bears return to California? So I'm very actively engaged, and I know I always will be.
What do mountains mean for you?
Well, I'm a mountaineer, so mountains have always been close to my heart. But I'm also an adventurer and explorer, and mountains aren't necessarily a landscape that I favor above others, but I love also big, wide, open plains. One of my favorite trips of my life was crossing a remote corner of northwestern Tibet where no human beings live at all. It was a high, open plain with no people for 500 miles in any direction. Not a single one. As wild as any place on the earth. So wide open places, mountains, the desert, oceans. I've been a sailor all my life. I've a lot of small boat crossings of the ocean. I just love it all. I just love all the wild places on our beautiful planet.
Your bond with nature is unique.
Yeah.
Do you have a message for future generations?
Yeah, the message I have for younger people today is to get to know nature, to get out into the wild places in our world and get the beauty of nature into your bones. And then once you fall in love with nature, then inevitably you're going to discover that you need to do what you can do to protect nature. And I think that's one of the most important things any of us can do with our lives.
And necessary as well.
It's very necessary. So my greeting to all in Ladero Sur. Thank you so much for your support of Walmart Chile for the sustainability conference that I was privileged to have a small part in. I think it was very successful, that it got a very important message out to the suppliers that Walmart works with, who I think after the conference today are thinking a little bit differently about their businesses. And that is in large part to the work that all of you have done. So thank you, Ladera Sur.